This begins an interview with Mr. John E. Skinner on October 27, 1995 at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey with Kurt Peeler and
Steve Gillen.
And I guess I'd like to begin by asking a few questions about your parents and your strong roots in New Brunswick.
Mm-hmm.
Your father came to New Brunswick. Do you know why he came to New Brunswick?
Uncle Sam brought him here. He was here. He was stationed for a period of time over at Raritan Arsenal during World War I. And that's how he met my mother.
Really, at a dance?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she was from New Brunswick.
Yes, her origins were in New Brunswick.
Your father's military service, was he drafted or was he? Did he enlist? Did he ever?
He enlisted, I believe. That I'm not that sure, but I think he said he enlisted.
Mm-hmm. And did he see service overseas?
No. He was. He spent most of his time over Raritan Arsenal and camped up at Upton on Long Island. He was a mess sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
He used to starve the boys.
Did your father ever join the American Legion?
Yes.
So I take it he was very proud of his military service.
Yes, we all are proud of our military service.
So if your father, in a sense, hadn't met your mother, he might not have stayed in the area. You get the sense of New Brunswick that your mother was.
Oh yes, that's the reason. Of course, he stayed here. Yeah, because as I said before in our conversation, his origins were Connecticut, but he stayed in New Brunswick because he met my mother and married her, and I'm here.
And your father was a butcher. Did he own his own shop, or did he?
No. He worked for someone.
And
he managed the shop, you know.
Mm-hmm. But he never owned his own.
No.
What's your? You've known New Brunswick for a number of years. What's your earliest memories of New Brunswick growing up? And some of your distinct memories.
Well, that's how far back you want to go. Your memory becomes a little hazy. Probably my original memory was when I went my first day of school. Of course, they didn't have kindergarten in those days, and my mother tells me I cried like a baby. So that would be I remember going to school and the closeness of the associations in New Brunswick that's absent today. I mean, we had a very close-knit neighborhood. Everyone knew everyone else. And, of course, an awful lot of my early memories are associated with the university here because I only lived 2 blocks away from Rutgers Gym, the old Rutgers Gym. And we spent many a time sneaking in to watch basketball games, or they played lacrosse up here or at Nelson's Field. And we used to go up to the guys. I remember Joe Burrill from Bound Brook, who was an excellent lacrosse player. Joe used to let us carry the bag so we could get in the door, and the men from Rutgers used to look the other way. And then I can remember we were sneaking into Rutgers Gym, sliding down the coal chute. It was heated by coal, and in fact, one time one of my friends broke his arm going down a coal chute. But we get down a coal chute, and you'd walk up into the stands. And everybody be staring at you. And of course, we were kids. We couldn't understand why. We were black from all the coal and everything else. But that was a fond memory. And then, of course, when they built the stadium across the thing, we used to hop the fence to get in and watch. In fact, we snuck in the first time Rutgers ever beat Princeton in football when Art Gottlieb threw that pass to, I think it was Joe Varney. I think it was, yeah. In 38, was it? Something like that. But as I said, a lot of the old memories. We used to have... They used to play baseball at Nelson's Field. And, of course, in those days, when we were growing up, it was Depression, and no one had any money to buy balls and everything. And we used to form a relay team. And guys would hit a foul ball over the fence, and we'd grab it. And, of course, the managers would chase us and grab us, try to get the ball. And when they catch one guy, we'd throw it to the next guy. And that's the way we were supplied. Of course, we lived up in Bugalo Park playing baseball 10 hours a day, I guess it was, or football, or whatever the season is.
But that's how you got your baseball from catching the foul ball.
Yes, that was one way. And then, of course, when we weren't lucky, or we'd tape up all the old balls with this old-fashioned electrical tape, and you hit it a good whack, and you can see the tape unraveling as it comes along like a rocket with a tail. But no, that was the source of supply.
You mentioned your neighborhood was very close knit.
Oh yes, yeah.
What was the makeup? How many people, for example, were Irish background? How many were any other background? Italian,
Well,
Hungarian?
it was a mix. Hungarian was the two of my closest friends were Hungarian. They were American born. They were born here, but the parents came from Hungary. Another one was German. Another was Irish. I'm half Dutch and half Irish. So it was a general makeup of all ethnic groups. But then we had the black fellas used to live down the street by the firehouse, and we used to play ball with them, and they played ball with us. And right across the street, down a couple of houses, it was nice with black family. So it was a general ethnic mix. We used to play ball in the park, Bugalo Park in the league, and we'd play against a black team called the Kansas City Monarchs, and we'd have fights, but it was nothing. I mean, the next day you'd be out there palling around with the guys again. It was just briefly of the moment. So it was a complete mix.
When did the Kansas City Monarchs come in?
Not the Kansas City Monarchs, New Brunswick Monarchs.
Oh, okay.
New Brunswick Monarchs. They were named after the Kansas City Monarchs. And they had some real good ball players, and they were good friends of mine. And
What year do you remember that big game?
with all big games, every 2 or 3, 4 times a year, we used to play ball, and that was back before the war. Before the war, we played some after the war, but.
So it sounds like growing up, sports was very important.
Sports was very important to me. Even after when I was going here, I played a little ball at college, and then you'd go out on the side and you play ball. And you get $15 a game. My name used to be Otlowski, so you wouldn't play under your own name or anything like that. But these stores would sponsor teams, and they need ball players, and they pay you $5 or $10. But sports was a very important part of my life. It still is.
What about going to school? What do you remember of you were very upset the first day of school, but
no, I remember going to school. It was a very nice relationship. We used to walk from Wyckoff Street up to St. Peter's in New Brunswick, and later on in high school, one of the guys got an old car. I think the floor was out of it. We used to all pile in that and drive to school. But our association with school was another thing. It was very close-knit. Now, to give you an example of what I mean, my wife, I guess it was last Friday, last Friday was. She had her 50th anniversary high school graduation. And you walk in there, and I know most of the people because I went to the same school as my wife. And it was if you had just left them 2 days ago. You pick up the conversation, and you might not have seen these people in 30 years or something like that. So it was very close-knit. The school was small. It was a Catholic school, and everyone knew everyone else. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the gals that graduated from high school with my wife taught 2 of my daughters and lived next door to us. So, it was an intermingling of people.
One of the things that people have commented who've gone to the New Brunswick schools, particularly high school, was how much of New Brunswick was a regional school system in the 30s.
There was no regional school system in those days.
In a
sense, well, no, I'll amend that, because you could say it was just regional, but it wasn't regional in name, because St. Peter's was sort of regional because kids would come from Bound Brook, Rawway, because they didn't have all the different high schools, the number of high schools they have around here today. And I think Brunswick High encompassed North Brunswick and Milltown and a couple of the other surrounding things, but they weren't regional in name.
Yeah, it wasn't. But in the sense that you did have these what people have remembered as farm kids come.
Oh, sure, they were farm kids. They'd come in. I think that probably Brunswick had more farm kids than we did. A lot of the kids that I was friendly with and I went to school with, they came from Rawway, and they used to commute on a train, or they'd hitchhike in from Dunellen. I don't know if you want to call Dunellen a farm town. It was kind of rural in those days, but Bound Brook.
So you went to St. Peter's. You went through St. Peter's for all 12 years.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
How often did your family attend Mass? Did they go every week?
Let's put it this way: we're not acting Catholics; we're participating Catholics. We go every night, still do. Mm-hmm. We go every.
So the church was very important to you.
Oh, sure. Still is.
How did the Depression affect your family?
Well, I can remember going out and darn socks and pants were repaired, but we were fortunate probably than some of the people because my dad was in the meat business, and we might have eaten hamburger instead of steak, or but we were quite fortunate. We were poor. We didn't have. I mean, my father used to have to save to buy coal to heat the house just like everyone else.
But your father always had work during the Depression?
Yes. Yep.
What about your neighbors? How were they doing?
Well, some of it was sort of a split. I mean, most of my neighbors, I think, were quite fortunate in this respect that they didn't make much money, but they didn't lose their job. Some of my friends, I know, their parents were out of work, and they used to go down and to the train yards and cuss at the engineer, and they'd throw coal at him. I mean, that's the way they got their coal. But the engineers knew what the kids were doing. They'd collect coal in a bucket and they'd go home and put it in the furnace. But I would say we were fortunate compared to some people. Some people really had it. I mean, you take some of the Okies and stuff like that. We had nothing like that. We were quite fortunate.
Did your family own a car in the 20s?
My father never owned a car in his life.
Really?
Nope. Didn't know how to drive. Never got a car. Never had an urge to get a car. My oldest daughter's the same way. The one who works down here, she doesn't have a driver's license. Thank God. I mean, that's some of the gray hairs when I try to teach her to drive. But no, my father never had a car.
Growing up, what did you think you would become? I mean, what did you want to become? Did you expect to go to? Maybe the question I said, did you expect to go to college when you were growing up, or did you hope to go to college?
I hoped to go to college. It was a question of I knew it would probably be a long affair. If Uncle Sam didn't come along, I'd have to go out and work because my people didn't have enough money to send me to college.
But would they have wanted you to go to college?
Yes. My mother was very much in favor of education. So was my father. My father says if I ever became a butcher like him, he'd kick me right in the butt. So he was because he did want me to go to college if I could make it.
Was it difficult? Well, maybe the question is. You went to St. Peter's. Was it difficult for your family to send you to Catholic school in terms of the cost?
They didn't have a tuition in those days. It was part of the services offered by the parish. And at that time, their expenses were nil because they had mostly nuns. I think probably the only lay teachers, I remember, was Bud Murphy. He was football coach and baseball coach and history and PAD and principles of democracy and so on. But
otherwise, you had nuns the all the way through.
Oh yeah. They were very good with the ruler too. Not like this. Across you have to make a fist and they whack you on the knuckles.
It sounds like you had that once or twice.
Yeah. We used to have a nun by the name of Sister Catherine. She's quite a big woman, and we were from a section of town they used to call it Bloody Six, the Sixth Ward. And they got that name, it was prior to my generation, but one side of the Sixth Ward was Irish, the other side was German. And my grandfather used to tell me they used to meet at Easton Avenue and have brick fights and fights and stuff like that. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that was a story. That's what we used to call a Bloody Six. But anyway, we had a nun by the name of Sister Catherine who was sort of overseer. And let's face it, I wasn't the most prompt individual. I used to get to school a little late because you fool around on the way to school, or you get in a fight, or something like that, And she'd be waiting there, and she'd give you hell, and you had to put out the hand for 3 whacks. But I'll tell you, if anyone messed around with her boys, they were in trouble, boys. She used to stick. I felt sorry for the girls because she used to stick up for the boys, something awful. The same way with our high school principal, Sister Benita. She was, God rest her soul, we used to call her the fish. But she was a good gal. She was tough, very tough. I mean, discipline. That's one thing we had in the school was discipline. We none of this fooled around like they have today. I'm not downgrading. I can tell you, it's just a different generation. But they enforced discipline. We had sometimes 50 and 60 kids in a class. No messing around, boy, because they instructed. And if you had a little disagreement that the nun couldn't handle, Bud Murphy would come in, the coach, and he'd come in and take care of it. he was an ex-pro boxer in his younger days, and he was a tough cookie. And he looked it too. He had a bent up nose, and he was a great guy though. I'll tell you what kind of a guy he was. He used to get the athletes from New Brunswick High more scholarships than their coaches at Brunswick High did. He just lived for the kids. I don't know how many times I understand that Rutgers offered him a coaching position, but he wouldn't go.
Really, he was very loyal to them.
Oh, very loyal.
Academically, how well did it prepare you for college and for the Air Force? Did you?
Very well. Very well. One thing I found, and it's the same way with my son, who attended. Well, all my kids attended Catholic school, but they teach you how to study. I mean, a lot of kids have problems of the adjustment from high school to college because they don't know how to study. And I think that's one of the main things that I learned at school, was how to study. And you had to study. You had to do your homework. If you didn't, you'd be up the creek, so to speak.
So it sounds like you were really, I mean, not only were you pleased with your education, but it really left an influence. You wanted to pass it on to your children.
Oh, yes. All my kids attended Catholic school because of my experience. And in fact, 2 of my daughters graduated from St. Peter's also, and then I was transferred to Long Island. And my 3rd daughter went to school over there, and then my son, he went into an all-boys school that was taught by Franciscan brothers. And he said that was when he didn't want to go, because he went to when I was transferred and he moved over, he went to public school for a few grades, and of course he had formed new relationships and so on and so forth. And when it was time to go to St. Anthony's, he was reluctant. But he tells me every time the subject comes up now, he says that was the greatest thing that ever happened to him. And it was because he had the same type of relationship that I experienced. Everyone knew everyone else. Mm-hmm. And they taught him how to study, and you didn't jock around with those guys. They were tough. One of them was an ex-steel puddler from Pittsburgh, used to work in the mills. At the indoctrination, when the freshman class came in, you'd visit all the teachers. And I remember sitting in a class to Brother Zip, they call him. And one parent asked him if he has any disciplinary problems. And you know the long robes they wear, he put up his hand, and he had forearms as big as my leg. He said, "No, I don't have a bit of problem at all." But no, that's, like I said, I tried to, maybe I was wrong, I don't know, but I try to give my kids the same experience I have because I valued it.
Growing up in the 30s, what did you know about world affairs?
Not a hell of a lot.
Did you ever read the newspapers?
Occasionally, but most of my reading, I'll be honest with you, was to see what Lou Gehrig did. You know, I wasn't cognizant that, let's face it, today the kids are much more aware, or they should be anyway, I don't know, they have more information at their system. We're a bunch of naive individuals. I mean, we weren't aware of the general things that the kids of today are aware of.
Had you ever heard of, say, the Spanish Civil War when it was going?
Yes, I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, when you were growing
yes,
up?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
What about...
I'll amend that. Let's see. After I got up, say, 7th and 8th grade, then I did read more of the papers, because my father used to say, used to push a little bit to read, and my mother was always forced me to read, and to this day I read constantly. And I'll watch television, but I'll do more reading than I watch television, and I think that's developed from the earlier days.
When did you have the sense that the United States might be going into the war? Did you have any sense before Pearl Harbor?
I don't recall any particular feeling that we were going into the war. It's kind of hard to remember that far back, but I don't recall any particular feeling that war was imminent. No, I can't say I did.
Your father, how did your father feel about Roosevelt and the New Deal?
Well, he wasn't particularly fond of him.
Mm-hmm.
He old-fashioned. He's conservative, very conservative.
How did you feel about Roosevelt and the New Deal? Did you share your father's feelings?
I shared my father's feelings at the time. Of course, naturally, it's handed down. I thought that some of the things he did, especially we used to see all the waste and everything with the WPA and all the various programs. But as I said, we were naive in those days, and we really, who the hell cares? We want to know whether Garrick or somebody hit a home run. That was our big thing in those days.
Did you ever go to any of the games in
I went to quite a few. In New York, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I was at Lou Gehrig's the day he retired, when he had that. I don't know if you've ever seen it on television or in the movies, and that was a very moving experience to see a man, because you remember Garrick. Garrick was a big man. In fact, I don't know, when he used to play ball up here, he played for Columbia University. I think you're aware of that. He was saying that he hit the longest home run that was ever hit up there. But anyway, and in a row in back of us was two guys. They looked like they were big truck drivers. And if you want to see two men ball like a babies, they really moved. It was a moving experience. I mean, because you'd see him in your mind before the ceremonies began. You would picture Garrick belting a ball out of the park and running and so on and so forth. And then when you see him have to pull himself up by his hands to get out of the dugout, it was a very sad thing, because in those days, what did he have? Was it osteomyelitis or whatever it is, something like that? No one knew what that was. They didn't have any idea. And as I said, I still have little black and white pictures home I look at occasionally when I reminisce. But I can still picture it in my mind right now as I'm talking to you. Kurt. I went down with the father of, not my father, but father of one of my friends. We went down.
Did your parents ever go on vacations away from New Jersey?
Not out of New Jersey. Well, we went to Connecticut, up there for vacation. We went down to the shore, Jersey Shore. That's about the extent of our travels. We never, say, went to California or anything. Couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
We were poor and didn't know.
You enlisted in the Army, or the Army Air Corps.
Yeah.
Were you interested in aviation?
Oh, sure. Yeah. To give you a little history, I thought maybe one time I was going to be in the military. I took the West Point exam, and I flunked it. I had flat feet, and they wouldn't pass me in those days. This is when I was a junior in high school. And as soon as I graduated, then I enlisted in the Air Force. I think I was 16 or 17, something like that.
So you would have liked to have gone to West Point if...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I think I would have, at that time, I was sort of leaning toward the military, but also for the fact is, it's a free education. And I think that was probably one of my biggest motivators, that the free education.
When I asked you if you were interested in aviation, did you ever go out to Hadley Field to watch the planes take off? Is that...
Oh, yeah. I used to have a bike, and my friend and I, we used to ride. He didn't have a bike. I had a bike, and he used to ride the handlebars, and we'd we'd ride from Wyckoff Street out to Hadley Airport, and we would wash airplanes for a ride. And we were very frequent visitors out there. That's the first time I was ever in the air. And I used to very much look forward to the Bell Telephone. Used to keep their Ford tri-motor out there. And one of my wife's distant cousins, actually it's a cousin of her mother, was known as the black sheep of the family. He was a pilot. He flew the first airmails, and he used to always stunt over town. And I didn't know my wife at the time, but I used to watch him, and I can remember him buzzing the house. I used to go with a girl that lived across the street from me, and he'd come down, and he almost hit that chimney. And he was the old strut and wires in those days. You flew by the seat of your pants. I mean, you had a compass, and that's about it. But I was always interested. I made model planes all the time. I was always interested in aviation.
And you had even been in a plane before the war. From
I had my first airplane ride with a fellow by the name of Clarence Chamberlain. I don't know if you read the history of Lindbergh's flight, you know that there was 2 or 3 other over there at Roosevelt Field in Long Island that were compete to get off first, and Clarence Chamberlain was one of them. But he cracked up, and so did Admiral Byrd was the other one. He had a Ford tri-motor like Bell used to keep over here, and he had problems with it. And when Lindbergh took off, I mean, he took off they were having pretty lousy weather, but he took a shot, and he beat the other people. And Clarence Chamberlain was a well-known airman in those days. He was had a reputation because there was a lot of barnstorming in those days. And I had the first ride. He come over here, and I think for $1 or something, he'd give you a ride around town. He had an old Curtiss Condor, which was one of the original transport planes. It was a biplane, but it was a transport. It had capacity, 10 people or something like that. But that was my first ride.
Well, let me give Steve a chance to ask some questions.
Well, I wanted to ask specifically, like when you were talking before about the makeup of your neighborhood.
Yeah.
You never had I'm kind of comparing it today because you were comparing it like a lot of the problems that say a lot of these New Jersey cities have now. Would you say it was more of a close knit environment? By the time you went to war?
You mean rioting and things like that, or what do you exactly do you mean?
Like along those lines.
No, we had a lot of disagreements. I mean, as I said, our particular neighborhood was not so ethnic in nature, singly ethnic, because as I said, it was Hungarians, Irish, German. But New Brunswick in those days was divided into certain areas that were recognized by ethnics. We lived here by Rutgers was more or less Irish, with a few Hungarians in there. Across Eastern Avenue, they used to call, as I said before, Dutchtown. That was German. You go further up on Somerset Street and Lewis Street and Saddam and all that area, that was all Hungarian. Those people were all brought over by Johnson & Johnson from Hungary for the purpose of working in the factory. And then you go a little bit further down Somerset Street towards Franklin Township, there was a Polish section there. You go across the other side of town, it was Italian, over at St. Mary's Church.
Okay.
So it was divided in that manner.
Right.
But as far as having riots and things like, hell, we had fights and everything, sure, but nothing like today.
Right.
Nothing at all. And as I said, in our neighborhood, we had Mr. Van Loo, who's a black family that lived down the street. We had, what the heck was his name? I can't think of the other fellow that lived 2 doors down from us, another black family. And then further down, we had some more black people. So it was an intermix of everything. And we never had the problems as they call us hunkies, or we call them niggers and things. No, we didn't have that. We had disagreements. We had fights, but there are fights that were normally occur with kids growing up playing ball. Somebody will slide too hard or hit him when he's out of bounds or something like that. But nothing, no riots.
Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, not my generation, anyway. I don't know what they had before me, but
yeah.
You enlisted in the Air Corps. Where did you try to enlist? And how did that process go? Because you had flat feet before, and you've been unable to get into the academy.
Yeah, well, I enlisted here in town, down at the post office. They had the recruiting station. And I took a physical over the same place, same doctor that gave me West Point exam, and he passed me for the Air Force. There was a war on it. Well, when I tried for West Point, there was no war on it. They were more stringent. Well, my feet weren't actually completely flat at those times, but he says that as I grew, because I was growing, I wasn't that big when I was in high school. I mean, I grew, most of my growing was when I was in the Air Force. He said, they're going to become weaker, and he says, you're not going to be able to be a gravel pounder, as he put it. And he says, but as far as qualifying for the Air Force, he said, there's no problem. And I mean, we had rigorous PT in the Air Force.
Where were you when Pearl Harbor occurred? Do you remember that?
I was home. I think we had just gotten back from Mass. And in those days, you had a fast before going to communion. And I was probably sitting down and having something to eat. And when it come over the radio.
How much of a shock was it to you and your parents the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, it was a shock. It was shocking everyone. I don't know of anyone it wasn't a shock, because they never anticipated that. The whole atmosphere of the country, as I said, was, the people, I think, were naive. They weren't as cognizant of world affairs, and the average person, I don't think they ever expected Pearl Harbor like it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of anyone. I mean, everyone I talked to, my generation and my parents' generation, expressed the same thing.
How soon after Pearl Harbor did you enlist, or have the idea of enlisting?
Well, Pearl Harbor was in 41. I graduated in 42, so
But it sounds like shortly after
Yes.
you graduated. How did your parents feel about?
Well, my mother was very, very anxious. My father understood. In those days, when our classes at school, our year of graduation, all the boys, I mean, there was nothing else that you considered.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't consider anything else. That was your duty, to go into service. You go to Marines.
Mm-hmm.
One of my best friends was a Marine. The other guy was in the Navy, and I went into the Army. Another guy went into the Navy. So, but they never thought of goofing off or trying to avoid the draft. At least the guys I palled around with, anyway. And I would say that probably 95% of the people of my age felt the same way. They just wanted to go to service. Let's face it, a lot of us used to go in there. We weren't exposed to the world or anything like that. If we didn't go to the service, I mean, we probably wouldn't have been to half the places we've been.
In that spring semester that spring of 42, when you were still here at home, did you do anything for the war effort that you could?
Oh, sure, yeah. You'd collect this and collect that, and they'd have the drives, and that's about the extent of it.
Mm-hmm. Did your father, did he join the civil defense or any?
No, he didn't, because he used to work with they had Camp Kilmer when Camp Kilmer was established, and he used to do a lot of work for them over there, and as far as supplies and so on and so forth, because he helped supply Camp Kilmer's
with fresh meats,
the fresh meat and stuff like that.
One of the questions I always had, I've asked a number of people who grew up in New Brunswick or lived here during the war, had some contact, is the impact of Camp Kilmer on New Brunswick, because that was a major staging area. A lot of people going through.
It was had a tremendous impact on it. Economically. Of course, a lot of people made. One of my father's friends, he made a fortune. He had 2 or 3 saloons in this town, and he made more money than God had pills. But anyway, economically, it was a big impact. The whole character of the town changed with the influx of so many soldiers, because New Brunswick is a small town, and it wasn't a cosmopolitan town as it is today. My wife went to school, was going to school and working at night, but she said she never had any problem walking home or anything like that. The soldiers were pretty.
Never a problem with drunk and unruly soldiers?
Oh, sure, there was drunk and unruly soldiers downtown, of course, yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, let's face it, those guys, I mean, they're human, they're just like anyone else, and they get bombed and have a fight or something, but P's used to wrap them in the head or do something, and but they sure there was things like that. But as far as we see, I left, but I don't know whether there was that much antagonism between the civilian population. And I'm sure there was, because most camps do. When, especially a small town, if the military overwhelms you, there's got to be a feeling of antagonism of some form or another, because it's a different. You have to clash. It's just like when you where I live now in Bucks County. That was a rural, and now you get the old timers. Goddamn place building up, it's ruining everything, and that's the same effect that camp would have. Camp would have,
You reported you enlisted in New Brunswick and reported for your physical the same doctor who had rejected you for West Point. Then where did you report to?
I left out of Newark. We went on a train from Newark. We went down to have that really tough basic training in Miami Beach. Living in a motel. I mean, a hotel. No, we went down. We took a train from Newark. I think it took us about 3 days to get down there. It was you'd have to pull aside every important shipment, more important than us. And I can remember doing KP on a train, and that was my first exposure to KP. Was on a train, but that was all right. You got good food. You could always eat better than the other guys. So we took a train, and I can remember going past Washington D.C. The lights were still on down there. There was no blackout or anything. They didn't. I can always I remember seeing an interview on television from a German U-boat captain. He says that the East Coast lights early used to provide a nice background for it. But then we went down and we reported to Miami Beach, and they lined us up down there. And I remember the first experience of aircraft. We were standing in formation, and I looked up, and there was an F-4F Grumman fighter and a P-40 Army fighter, and they were dogfighting up there, and they collided. And that gave us pause. The guys bailed out, fortunately, but they were horsing. They shouldn't have been, but they were horsing around. But that was my first exposure.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things I've learned from this was really I had no awareness, or now I do, but how dangerous training was in World War II for flyers.
Well, I'll tell you, we felt more comfortable overseas as far as the mechanical condition of the aircraft is concerned than we did in the States. Those guys overseas used to treat us like a baby. And you come back with flak holes or bullet holes in it, why, they chew you out for crying. What are you doing to my airplane? Look at this. I got to patch that thing. It wasn't like that. They used to mother the planes. And most of the guys were like that. I'm sure there was exceptions, but all the people that I've contacted, ground crews, they were great overseas. In the States, it was not as close a relationship, and I don't know, but we felt more comfortable with the.
Well, you're not the first one. One of the things that I've been surprised is how many people how fond they were of their ground crews overseas, that they really had a lot of respect for them.
Oh, sure. Because those guys used to put a lot of hours into all kinds of weather. I can remember we were ferrying a plane over to Africa, and we landed up in Newfoundland, and it's cold as the old mother-in-law's proverbial mother-in-law's kiss, and out there we were going to take off in the morning, and I can remember those guys, that number 3 engine wouldn't start, and I can remember those guys out there in the freezing cold and sleet, and they didn't like it, I'm sure, but they stuck right to it and got the thing going for us, and we took off and went to the Azores. I mean, it was a long hop over water, but they were I would say they were great. I really would.
I mean, I'm also partly surprised because while soldiers are very resentful of the people behind the lines, in quartermaster and so forth, you would think that I was surprised to see that there's been very little resentment of ground crews, because they're in a sense out of harm's way.
No, well, they're out of harm's way, but without them, you wouldn't be nothing. I mean, you'd be dead.
Yeah.
I mean, you get up there, the engine quit on takeoff. I mean, listen, they were underpowered enough, and you see what happened when planes take off. I can remember one time a plane took off. And they had what they call a runaway prop, and they threw it. And it cut right through the engine, cut out the tires, and of course the plane crashed. And I wasn't flying that day. We all ran over to try to get the guys out. But it was on fire. We couldn't, and the bullets were starting to pop. And I can remember, I think it was 3 or 4 of us had to hold a chaplain down, keep them from going in that fire. You couldn't get near it. It blew up and the guys were all killed. But they, as I said, even though those guys were, that may sound like a contradiction, but accidents do happen. I mean, you can't be 100% perfect, but those guys were very, very thoughtful and caring about their aircraft, and they wanted to. In fact, I think that there was a lot of competition between the ground crews. That, I do a better job than you, blah blah blah.
You mentioned the chaplain who wanted to risk his life. What was the relationship between the chaplains and the men that you could tell between you and the chaplain?
Very good. very good relationship. They used to sleep. When we were in Italy, we took over an old Italian airfield. And fortunately, we had barracks. We were living in tents for a while, but then we took over the airfield. We had barracks, and chaplain slept right next door. You go in there and you have a crap game or a poker game. There's the old chaplain right there, right along with it. And he had a dog, and the nickname of the dog, or the name of the dog, was Flack, after the Ack. And he had a jury. He jury rigged. He was always scrounging rides with the guys. You know, in fact, the CEO caught him trying to get on a mission, and that was. But he used to, when they test a plane, he would go and he'd take the dog with him, and he had some kind of an oxygen. I don't know how he did it, but the dog just sit there and he'd enjoy it. I mean, he was.
He was a priest. This chap.
No, this guy was an Irish minister from Boston, and that's almost a contradiction in itself. He was a minister. Huh? Pardon?
He was a Protestant.
Yes, he was a Protestant. I think he was Episcopalian, and he says he always used to tell us. He said, "I'm going to get you Catholic boys." He said, "I'm going to bring you back into." He was a great guy. A great guy. I mean, over their religion. I mean, he would conduct Catholic services, and the Catholic chaplain would conduct Jewish service. They all knew the routine.
Did you attend Mass regularly when you were?
Yes, we were able to attend Mass. In fact, we used to go to town a lot. They had, over in Italy especially, they had these beautiful churches, gorgeous churches. On the outside, they looked like bleh, but you go in there and it's gorgeous. And you wouldn't know what they were saying because they'd say it in their in Latin, of course, the Latin. But I mean, when they give their, well, they used to call it a sermon in those days. It's homily now, but you wouldn't understand what they were saying. But you could follow the Mass because then Latin was the universal language of the Mass, and I had 4 years of Latin, and I could read and speak fairly well. I mean, I wasn't fluent in it or anything, but I could follow the Mass. And but I did. There are times when you're flying you couldn't go, but I did as much as I could.
Did you ever get to the Vatican when you were in Italy?
No, nope. That's one thing I regret. In fact, we had I couldn't get up. We were going to go up to the Vatican after they captured Rome, and then we had big deal. We were going to go to Isle of Capri for a rest period, and I think we just got off the boat when the guy said, "All right, boys, throw your stuff back on. You're going back." It was the start of we had to go up and bomb for some, I don't know, the Germans had started some offensive or something. So we really didn't get to the Isle of Capri. I didn't see that much of Italy. I was in the southern part of Italy in a little town called Manduria, which is down by Taranto, the port down there. And most of our missions, we'd fly right across the Adriatic up through where Yugoslavia and Italy meet, go across the Trieste that way. Yeah. Up there.
Just going back a bit to your training, you reported to Miami Beach, which is not a bad place to.
No, that was nice.
I guess one of my initial questions is what did you think? I mean, you really had been really outside of New Jersey, New York, growing up. What did you think of this tremendous training?
Well, it was an experience, you know. Yeah, you look around, but of course in those days everything was military, but it was a novel experience. As I said, we were so naive in those days, it was pitiful. My kids of today know more when they were 10 years old than I did when I graduated from high school, I guess. But anyway, it was a novel experience. We enjoyed it. We were impressed by Miami Beach. And as I said, we lived in a hotel. And
you did your basic. Did you have any hopes of being a pilot when you?
Yes, I washed out of school. I got caught dogfighting.
Really?
They washed me out. I was fortunate. The guy I was fooling around with wound up in the infantry, and I was lucky. I got the radios, but I washed out.
So what level did you washed out at the? You had even went through basic.
Well, see, what they did is you go to Miami Beach. You had your basic, and you'd learn to handle a rifle, a pistol, and a Thompson, and of course an awful lot of it was devoted to physical training. I mean. And then after that, you went to college. You went to a lot of the colleges were conducting, just like Rutgers had the ASTP here. Army Special Training Program, and you'd go there for a few months, and you'd start your flying there. They'd take you up in these old. I was flying in a Taylor Cub, and out there it was in Ohio. I don't know if you heard of Hiram College.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little school in Ohio. I think there was about 450 people, including the cats and dogs in the town. A nice little town. And we were very fortunate because we had the local women cooking for us. It was all home-cooked meal. And our CO was a hell of a good guy. He says if you're not satisfied, he said you don't have to go get up. You don't leave that table until you're filled. Well, of course, none of us were satisfied because right after you leave, you'd go to a formation. So we'd all stay and eat like hell. But because we wanted to miss the formation, of course. But then you start flying out there, and we were flying out these. It was a Taylor Cub as opposed to a Piper Cub, and they were these little putt-putts. I had about 65 horses in it, and I can remember flying out there one time, and all of a sudden I got in the middle of the storm, and I didn't know where the hell I was. And there was a lot of turbulence and so on and so forth. And I saw a hole, and I landed in a farmer's field, and I sat there, and I started, and you didn't open the door this way, that they fold down. There were folding doors, and I started to find, and I saw this thing coming across the field, looked like the biggest wolf I ever saw. It was a farmer's German Shepherd, and he was barking. The farmer says, "Don't worry, son," he says, "he will bite you." I said, "Well, you tell him," and I flipped that door up. And I happened to be only about half a mile from the airfield, and I got my fanny chewed out for that. Well, I couldn't see. I said, "I'm not going to mess around up here." And but that's when you started, and then you went on a different.
So you were out alone when you.
Yeah. As I said, those things there's nothing to fly. Those you take your hand off the stick and it'll fly right along. So, there was nothing. It had so much wing area that it was almost a glider.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you did get washed out of the program because of the dogfight. How did that come about?
Well, you fool around there. You're out there and you're flying, and you get on the other side of the mountain from the airfield, and you start to fool around. I mean, everyone did it, but we just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the instructor caught us, and we came down. And he says, "Bye-bye, boys." He was a tough son of a gun. He was a civilian, and they had civilian instructors in those days, and I just got kicked out. So I was very devastated, of course. You would be. I was 17, 18 years old, something like that. But you get over it. I call home, and my father said, "Look," he said, "it's what's to be is to be." And that was what it was.
If you had stayed in the program, would you have been a bomber pilot or?
Well, of course you didn't. You wouldn't know at that time. They would they'd assign you something. Probably. I had no idea.
You had no idea at that point.
No, at that time.
How many people didn't make it? I mean, you mentioned this other guy ended up in the infantry. They reassigned.
Well, they were. What happened is, I think that they were trying to cut down a number of applicants. They were one end of the arm, just like the arm, one end of the stick to know what the other. They had more guys enlisted in the cadet program than they could probably handle. And I'm saying that was to soothe my feelings, but there was a heavily washed out. Now, if you were in the Southeast Training Command, I understand that they didn't have as high a washout ratio. So I guess it all depended on the circumstances.
But you weren't alone in being because I've talked to some people and they talked about guys dropping out. They turn around.
Oh yeah.
But other cases, they don't remember anyone ever washing out.
Yeah. Well, see, as I said, I think that they were oversupplied with cadets. So that was the nature of the game, I guess.
When did you know? I mean, how long were you? After you'd been told you're out, how long did you have to wait until your reassignment?
Well, they brought you into a hall, and I guess they looked at your record, and I don't know how they picked me to go to radio school. I think I had a choice. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I had a choice to go to radio school or to flight engineer school, and I took radio. And then I went up to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And if you can tell, in those days, you could tell you almost 5 miles away from Sioux Falls, you get near there because they had a lot of meat packing. You could smell it there. But it wasn't that. The people were great. They were great people up there. Very, very friendly. Used to be able to hitchhike all over the the area, and they'd pick you up and where you're going, and they'd go out of their way to take you there. And I was in a barber shop one time up there, and I like to hunt and fish. And I don't know whether you're hunters or fishermen, but you hunt. Well, that South Dakota was the pheasant capital of the world in those days. And in those days, there was no one there to hunt, and just you walk across the field, and the pheasants get up like blackbird. And I was talking to this barber. I was getting a haircut, and we got talking hunting. And he said, "You like to hunt?" So I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well," he said, "why don't you come down and see me?" He said, "I don't have a gun." He said, "Oh, take my son's gun." We're out hunting, and they're very, they're very, very congenial.
It seems like you really enjoyed seeing these different parts of the
country.
country.
Oh yeah, I did. I think I hit just about every state in the Union, flying over, landing, and so infiltrating it, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed various parts of the country, just for what they were. Because, as I said, I never had been anywhere before that, and it was an education for me.
What about you mentioned in Hiram, Ohio, that you had the mothers of the community cook the meals. How much contact do you have with civilians?
A lot of contacts. How can I explain it? Because they don't have anything like it today. But Hiram had the little soda fountain store, the combination drugstore with the soda fountain and the old wired chairs, and that was sort of a meeting place. And you'd meet the girls there, or you meet what civilians around. The adults be coming in the store. And as I said, the people were very friendly. You always struck up a conversation, and we had quite a bit of contact. In fact, they'd invite you home to dinner.
So you had a number of home invitations home.
Yes.
Let me just. Oh no, actually, I have some more time on the tape. Your radio training. How long did that last? About.
Jeez, I don't. Yes, I really don't know, to tell you the truth.
But you spend a lot of time between your basic aviation and your
radio. So you go to radio school, then you go to gunnery school after that. And
where did you do the gunnery school?
U of Arizona.
So you'd really seen climactic extremes.
Contrasting. Up in South Dakota, that wind come down off those flats up there from the prairies, and it get cold, and they used to burn that soft coal. It stunk, it had that peculiar odor as opposed to hard coal. And then you go down to Yuma, Arizona, and my God, well, it got so hot down there, you couldn't take off after 11 o'clock in the morning because they had macadam runways. And they were using 17s as training ships and little Beechcraft, I think, was initial. But if you go to come in and land, it'd be soft, and you're allowed to lose your undercarriage. And you take off and you go all day. We had what's his name for our PT officer, Donald Budge. Remember him? I don't know if you remember. He was a world champion tennis player, and he'd come in there once a week and lay out the schedule and say, "Okay, boys, I know you'll do a good job," and you wouldn't see him till the next week. He'd be up in Hollywood. He was a character, nice guy, but he was never seriously involved in a PT training. He was a name only. We had another guy that was a pilot. A radio actor, Hollywood actor. You wouldn't remember the name, wasn't there? Gene Raymond. He was husband of Jeanette McDonald. He was there. He wasn't. We didn't care to fly with him too much. He wasn't the best pilot. He'd have bumpy landing, but he was all right. He'd come back in one piece. Any landing you walk away from in those days was safe.
You had that sense that any landing you could walk away with was a good landing.
Yes, right. Yeah. I mean, they're not sophisticated today.
I wanted to ask you, when you went to gunnery school, what did you train on the 50 calibers there?
That was the ultimate weapon, but you start out. What you do is you'd start out with shotguns, and they had a track oval in nature, and they'd have pickup trucks, and they'd have mounts in the back of the pickup truck with the shotgun right to the mount, and they'd have a machine gun sight. And you'd go along the track, and they would change it all the time. They would have certain points where they released birds, clay birds, and that's when you started to learn to lead.
Oh, okay.
But I did hunting before, and so it was kind of you come natural to you after a while. Right. The only thing you had to acclimate is with the pushing that thing around. Yeah. But the 50 caliber was the ultimate weapon. Then you'd go up and you'd fire at sleeves. They'd be towed, and your ammunition would be all color coded, and that way they could say John Jones had so many hits and Skinner had so many, so like that.
Did you have to put earplugs in ever for the 50s?
No, because you generally would have your earphone,
Okay.
or your helmet. You'd have a leather flying helmet